All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. Hello, Laura. Welcome to the fifth session in our summer webinar series about the employee hierarchy of needs. And this week we're talking about the next to the top layer, which is autonomy. And we've been doing this format for a few of the webinars so far, where I'm going to introduce the topic. And then Laura has been thinking of some questions and ways to discuss this. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with her momentarily. And so coLeague, if it's your first time joining us, hopefully you've learned about coLeague so far, but if you haven't, coLeague brings people experts to mission-driven organizations, freeing up leaders to focus on your most mission-critical priorities. And we do that in three main ways. First and foremost, we embed fractional people leaders in organizations, and that's usually on an interim and part-time basis. So those leaders sort of stand in as that HR leader, talent leader. It could be a business partner, it could be a chief people officer, could be an HR director, and serve in that position, but only temporarily, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and usually on a part-time basis, half-time, three-quarter time, sometimes even full-time. Second, we have quite a bit of specialized consulting and support. We have a huge network, not just of our chief people officers and other people experts, but also folks who are subject matter experts in lots and lots of topics. And we bring those experts into the organization to support projects like compensation projects or building a new system. And we also do quite a bit of coaching, leadership coaching. And so our cadre of people leaders spans the whole gamut of any kind of people work you can imagine. And of course, we have coLeague On Call, which is an on-demand HR support subscription service, which is like having someone like one of our coLeague leaders that's just a phone call away. And so there's a couple of tiers of membership there, but depending on the size and scope of your organization, you can have access to the people experts and expertise at coLeague without committing to a person in a specific position in your organization. So those are the three ways that coLeague supports mission-driven organizations. And the model that we've been talking about this whole summer is the employee hierarchy of needs. And the employee hierarchy of needs is a model that helps you really center your people in your talent strategy and infrastructure. And so when we're talking about talent strategy and infrastructure, we're talking about everything from your basic hiring plans and how you do hiring, all the way to job descriptions, but also your entire performance management, your entire org chart, all the ways we think about your talent strategy and infrastructure. We're applying this model to make sure that the things that we put in place first are supporting employees in such a way that the next layer that we build on to your talent strategy and infrastructure has a strong foundation in place. And so the 5 layers of the employee hierarchy of needs, as we've talked about all summer, starts with a strong foundation of safety, making sure the employees feel physically and psychologically safe, and that they're confident that their employment is legal and secure. We talked about having a strong sense of purpose, so employees know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how their work connects to the bigger picture. We talked about structure, which is not just the sort of operational structures you might exist, but here it's transparent talent systems and structures in place. And the way we dug into that was thinking about building those basic component parts first. And then this week, we're talking about autonomy so that employees can effectively and independently pursue their goals and know what type of future is possible at an organization. And then the top of that pyramid is incentive. So that's really a future focus. So employees need all of these other things in place to be able to start thinking about the future. They need to make sure their present is secure before they can put their minds on the long term. So as a recap, we talked about how safety is not a luxury. It often comes up in organizations, psychological safety especially, as being something that we'll take care of once everything else is in place. But the basis of this model is that you have to have this first, safety first, if you will. And we have to move beyond interpersonal psychological safety and move into structural psychological safety. And so you want your team to be able to answer these questions in the affirmative, or that these statements are true. I feel physically and psychologically safe at work. I'm paid a living wage. My employment is legal and secure, and I can get help if there's a big problem at work. And then we talked about purpose going beyond the mission. So in mission-driven organizations and nonprofits, we often think about that the mission is why we're here. It's the purpose. And that's true. But employees need to know that the work they're doing today connects to a larger, the bigger picture for work. So they need to know what their job is, why they're doing their job, how to do their job, and they need to know that they're actually working on the right things. And so our big takeaway there is for folks to feel connected to the work, they need to see how their work connects to the strategy and goals of the organization, not just the big mission, which might be so lofty that in your everyday work, you can't really access a direct connection to the mission. And then last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about structure. And so the idea here is that leaders should ensure that the first things that we build are the basis for future systems. So we're not haphazardly adding entire complex systems. We're really thinking about those first and foundational systems and structures that we put in place in order to be able to build more complex systems later. Because again, that is the foundation of the employee hierarchy of needs, which is if you try to implement complex initiatives and programs for your talent strategy and infrastructure, but your employees don't feel safe or they don't feel a connection to the mission or to the larger picture at work, and these component parts aren't in place, it can lead to lots of problems like burnout, resentment, turnover, all the sorts of things that can be a real challenge, especially when the market is tight and you get folks staying regardless of how they feel. So we don't want our employees burning out. We want them to feel connected to what they're doing and want them to feel calm and safe and reasonable so that they can get things done. So then, like I said, this week we're talking about autonomy. And autonomy, in our case, we're going to be digging in a little deeper here. But essentially, that all those goals that we set for our employees, that they can actually effectively and independently pursue those goals and know what type of future is possible for them. So the reason we say what type of future is possible is because the next level up, we'll be talking about specific future that they are working toward. Like that's the incentive, is the incentive for the future. But here, this layer means I know what type of future could be possible for me, even if my organization is in an early stage or is very small and doesn't have direct complex career pathways. Like I don't know what my next title is going to be, but I know the type of thing that might be next for me. And so the statements for autonomy, because we're thinking about empowering folks, but also supporting them, is a very important one related to the model we talked a lot about with safety, that SCARF model, which is I have a say in what happens to me at work. Like I have a general understanding in what's going to happen, have a say. And then second, I know what kinds of things could be possible for me here. And again, that's like maybe I'm pursuing a path toward people management, or I'm pursuing a path toward being an expert in my field. It doesn't mean that I know my next step is to become the manager of this department, but rather my next step is to do something that looks and feels like people management, right? Those are two different versions of the same story. And then of course, I know what to work on in order to achieve my goals. And that means that we didn't just set arbitrary goals, but the work that I'm doing today is connected to the work and things that I'm trying to achieve. And that means also not just my goals, like my work plan, but my professional development goals. If I want to become a really great public speaker, but there's nothing in my work plan at all related to public speaking, then you're not working on the right things in order to achieve those goals. And very important, this is a big statement, but I can do my job without undue or unreasonable interference, gaps, or barriers. And hang on just one moment. So before we move on, the big idea that we're thinking about here, and as I was digging into this, preparing for today, I was thinking a lot about the idea that your individual employee, no matter what their goals are, no matter what their professional development, their personal development, their work goals are, they should be not future-proof per se, but they should be able to survive organizational changes. They should be able to survive the resulting ambiguity from change. And I'm thinking also particularly, they should not be highly dependent on an individual in the organization. So this is a very common complaint, and I'm sure Laura will have questions, and we'll talk about this when she joins us again. But one of the biggest complaints I hear from folks, and this is in all kinds of organizations, not just nonprofits and mission-driven organizations, but tech companies, everybody I know that works in a company sometimes feels like their professional development, their career growth, their achieving their goals are reliant on the specific manager that they set those goals up with. And here we're thinking about that regardless of the size or stage of your organization, and regardless of who your manager is, regardless of what the current state is, those goals should stay relevant. And so we're going to talk a little bit more once Laura and I dig in about the ways to do that. And like everything, you're going to hear common themes. You're going to hear themes of transparency. You're going to hear themes of documentation. You're going to hear themes of management structures, because those are the things that can protect employees from the whims of caprice and change, which we just know is a given, right? Change is the only constant. And so for folks to have autonomy as they're pursuing their goals, they need to not have it be dependent on an individual. And this actually speaks to what we talked about in safety as well, that we don't want our psychological safety at work to only be interpersonal, meaning we're relying on the individual skill to provide psychological safety for a person. And every time you get a new manager, you have to find out again if this person is skilled in providing the psychological safety. So here it's the same, is that you want those goals to be centralized. You want those things to be clear, transparent. You want access to company information so that if there's turnover, if there's change, if there's a reorg, that it doesn't completely derail the employee's ability to pursue their goals. So Laura, talk to me. Tell me, what were you thinking when you were reading through this, and how can I enlighten you about this, I think, very important topic?
I love it. The one thing I was thinking about that we do hear from clients sometimes is we haven't gone through our strategic planning process in a while, or we haven't come up with our top line goals. Maybe talk a bit about how you would start this work if the goals are for the organization are still maybe not as crystal clear as you'd like them to be.
Oh, that's a really good one. So I think when the future is unclear, then I think we step back until the present is clear, right? We go back as many steps as we need to go until it's okay, this is what we're working on this month, right? We might not know what the larger thing is, but we know that we have to deliver this program in the next 6 weeks. We know that our monthly finances are due. We know that we have to do X, Y, Z. And so I think we scale back until it feels manageable, reasonable, and true. Because we can tolerate ambiguity if there's at least some clarity. And we think about how a lens works, right? If you're looking far, far in the future, you might lose some of the up close stuff, and you need a really special lens to be able to see both at the same time. Our eyes are really magically good at that. But at work, we want to think about big picture, future, always important if we know what that path is. If we don't, it's okay to have some ambiguity in the future, but that means we need to really get tight on what our goals are now, what we're trying to achieve now. And it also means that regardless, and I'm sure we'll touch on this in multiple ways, but if I'm on a team and my team is trying to achieve X, my career goals are probably the same for me, regardless of what my team is working on, because they're individual to me. They're not necessarily tied to the organization where I'm working. Most people aren't staying in jobs longer than 2 years. And so they're thinking about their career as a big picture thing, not just within an organization. And so it's tempting as leaders to think that career development only means within my company, but to be a good steward of your employees' careers and future, and to keep them satisfied and happy in their current role, you have to be comfortable helping them think about the future, regardless of where the organization goes, and get comfortable talking about, well, if we're not going to be working on those things, there might not be a place for you here, but let's make sure that there is a place for you somewhere by ensuring you can work on those things. And obviously keeping it relevant to the current work, not straying too far. But realizing that, employees' long-term career plans might not involve you.
That's great. I should also mention I might be having some structural challenges.
I think we're having a structural challenge right now.
Apparently. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yes, now I can hear you.
I will jump to the question quickly before I get thrown off
Oh,
again.
all right. I did not hear the question. Laura, do you want
Okay.
to send? Okay.
Yes. What if, and I will put it into the chat if it happens again. But
Okay.
what if an employee, there isn't a specific future for them? As you mentioned, it's an early stage organization. They're small. Um, how should the organization be supporting them? How should they be supporting themselves? How does that fit into um, the autonomy bucket?
Right. So when we're thinking about autonomy, we're making sure that they have access to what they need to have access to in order to independently pursue their goals. It doesn't mean that managers aren't involved. It doesn't mean that there isn't support and help. But if there is a vague future for the organization, let's say it's a tech startup and we have a really exciting product, we're super thrilled about it. But anyone who's ever worked in a startup knows that we might start one thing in one way, and then turns out the market demands something else entirely. Turns out this one feature that we thought was a small part of the thing that we made is the thing that everyone wants. And now we're doubling down on that thing. Um, and so helping employees think about what can they get good at, what can they focus on outside of just delivering work, which is what everyone has to do, especially in those sort of high stakes, early stage tech startup environment, is thinking about, not to repeat myself, but thinking about what is within our locus of control now. And then there's also, we do not have time to dig into the concept of scenario planning, but scenario planning is a really fascinating thing that comes from like military strategy and thinking about what are the conditions in the future that may or may not be true, and what would be true for me if we were in this situation or in this situation. Oftentimes, we like to think about what's true about us, and then how does that impact the future. The way to think about that differently is what kinds of futures are realistic and might happen to us, and what would be true for me if that was the case. And so that might be a fun exercise. I say fun because I like this type of thing. That might be a useful and productive exercise to think about, okay, so we think the winds of change are blowing in this direction in terms of, let's say, federal funding, or let's say, a good example is we work with a lot of clients in education, and we knew that a lot of pandemic related funding was going to be quote drying up, right? And so organizations were going to have to think differently, but we didn't know for sure, is it going to be gone? Will different funding replace it? And so our clients are thinking about, what environment will I be operating in? And that's how we can support employees of small or fast changing or early stage organizations, is thinking about how do I fit into those scenarios? And regardless of what my personal career goals are, maybe my long-term career goal is to be an executive director of a nonprofit, but right now I'm an operations associate, right? And so the executive director of a nonprofit job looks kind of the same regardless of the field or the mission and that type of thing. And so in that case, even though there's not a direct link between what my job is now and being an executive director, or even whatever the next stage, step down might be, a managing director of a department or something, it's like, okay, well, can they get access and exposure to what that job is, right? Can they do professional development that focuses on, learning about the pathways into an executive director role? That's for your very junior folks. If you've got your quote middle management folks, it might be thinking about, how can I run my department in a way that reflects how one runs an organization? Like, these are the types of things that one might do if there isn't a clear path to connecting with whatever might happen to my everyday job, and sort of just scale down, right? So I need access and exposure, or I'm going to practice by running this department, etc. Laura, I'm not sure of your current state.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, good.
I have a follow-up question for this one. I was like,
I think I've lost you again.
so frustrating. All
Okay.
right. Why don't you start with a question that I put in the chat, and then I will type in this other question.
Okay. Oh, chat. Ah, this is a great question. Laura asks, so how do you know if you jumped too quickly to autonomy? So we haven't talked about that yet, which is a statement that I think about a lot, which is that autonomy without support is lonely, right? You feel alone. If you give people too much independence, if you just set them free and say, like, here's some goals, but without the structure that they need, without the resources that they need, without the access that they need, then you've created loneliness or frustration or resentment, all the things that can lead to that anxiety and that frustration that leads to burnout, that leads to turnover, that leads to um, what can end up being a pretty toxic work environment. So it can be tempting to be like, to only hire people that you think can work autonomously and just to give them big goals and set them free. That might work for some people, and it might work for some organizations, but for the most part, especially if you have a wide range of levels of people in your organization, you've got people that are new in their career, you've got senior folks that have been around for decades. You really want to think about what kind of structures and support that they need. And that's different from an interference type of structure. And the meaning some people are reactive in their support of folks. Like, they only show up when there's a problem, right? They only show up when they feel like somebody's done something wrong or something's incomplete. And so a management structure that has regular one-on-ones, a management structure that has a standard way of giving and receiving feedback. These are the types of things that you can do to ensure that you're not giving too much autonomy, because people who are autonomous minded might just work and work and work and work, and they hit a barrier and they don't know what to do next. They might just go do something else, right? Instead of asking for help. So building in those structures for support and help, regardless of the person's level or a level of ability, is a good start. And you have another question. Laura says, you talked about how it shouldn't matter who your manager is because we know some managers are better than others. What can organizations do to support autonomy by supporting managers? And can they support individuals even if the managers are at different levels? So I think this is the whole point, right? When I talk about regardless of stage, size, ambiguity within your organization, it's often related to, we see that play out in people's ability to do management. People management is a really complex skill, and most people aren't born with natural people management abilities. It is a thing that should be learned, should be modeled for people, but most importantly, it should be taught, and it should be made very clear what good management in your organization looks like. And so by supporting autonomy by supporting managers, I think there's sort of two paths from there. One is the sort of centralization of as much as possible in your organization, even if you're very small and think that, well, we're all going to all these meetings, so we don't need a central place to put things. We don't need to document all this because we're all there. Well, anybody who's worked in a small organization that became a big organization knows that the growing pains happen right around the time you go somewhere between, when you get to somewhere between 35 and 50 people, and you start having lots of people who started the organization who aren't there anymore, et cetera. And you don't ever know what that magic day is when you should have been doing the documentation, because the day is day zero. And so you can support managers by providing everyone access to stuff, not just managers, right? So if you have a whole performance management process that has a lot of steps, everyone should be able to see what those steps are. You don't want it to just happen to them. That's what I mean by the phrase, I have a say in what happens to me at work. Part of that is just knowing what's going to happen to me. You could centralize a professional development library. You could centralize professional development opportunities. So it's not such a big onus on the manager to be thinking about that person's specific individual career, especially if they have a team of 15 that they're managing. Obviously, no one should have that many direct reports, but we all know that they do sometimes. And so by centralizing opportunities, centralizing information, centralizing things in a way that people can both access information. Also, when there's a lot of change, if you centralize that documentation. You can have things like a decision log that we've talked about before, other things where anybody can catch up to what's been going up until now. And then there's a way to do a version of like push notifications, like, oh, our strategy is adjusting to this market force. We lost this grant, so now what we're going to do is this. Having that be automatically updated somewhere that doesn't put the onus on just communicating from person A to person B. And that's that recurring theme of moving beyond the interpersonal into the structural and how we think about how we set up our business. Anything that automates that. And I like systems that are either the DIY version is something like Notion or Airtable, where you're just tracking and everything is in one central place. It's not in a million folders in Google Docs. It's in a central platform where everything's connected to each other. Or you can use a very highly structured, pre-designed, but much more expensive service like Lattice, where you can push out information about goals and strategy and that sort of thing. So there's the DIY version, cheaper, more complicated, but probably great for organizations that are smaller. And then there's the highly structured ones like Lattice. And I think there's plenty of other pieces of software. That's just the one I'm most familiar with. So I think it's just anything you can templatize, anything you can centralize, anything that you can make standard is supporting managers who haven't yet developed the robust set of skills that's required to be a good manager.
I love that. And I think about when you're talking about that growth and like that moment where it gets like too onerous for everyone to know everything. What I like about this also is to be able to do your work autonomously, you kind of need to know what other people are doing as well, right? And so having that sense of this is what this other team is working towards, this is what this other person that I work with all the time is working towards, I assume makes that a whole lot easier too.
Yeah. And, in the dream organization, if I've finished my stuff, I can go help someone do their stuff, right? And when you know exactly what everyone is working on, it's a lot easier to be able to lend a hand, or hopefully someone can lend a hand to you, which is just as valuable and important. And the knowing what people are working on is also directly related to the purpose layer of the employee hierarchy of needs, because we talked about how purpose is more than just the mission. Like, yes, we all share the mission. We care about it deeply. That's why we're here. But this week, this spreadsheet, this meeting might not feel directly connected to that mission. But if you can see the larger work plan, see what everybody's working toward in your department, in the larger organization, it's easier to connect what I'm doing today to what we're trying to achieve. And then that is also related to that access and exposure to what other jobs are like. So that's related to professional development. If you can see that a person with this type of title at this type of level in this type of department does this type of work, then you have a much better idea of what might be a good fit for you in the future. Because some people have a sort of like idea of what being a senior leader is like, and they think that it's less work because you don't see them doing as much, quote, busy work. You can start to understand accountability and the sort of how work gets disseminated through the organization, all the things that give you that organizational knowledge and intelligence that can help you be more successful in your current role, but also in your long-term career. And then Laura, the last question you have for me is, what are the first things an organization should do to assess how they are doing on autonomy? That's a great question. I probably need a second to think about that. It's quite good. Is if I was an organization and I'm like, how is everybody doing on autonomy? I think that I would just ask to see, like, first of all, I would be like, can I go to the place where everybody's work is listed? No, I can't. If I'm an executive director, if I'm a COO, I'm a chief of staff, and I want to know what everyone's working on, can I find that out without having to talk to 11 individual managers? If I want to know what the status on this project is, do I have to ask someone or can I go see? Those are examples of what an autonomous leader is able to do to find out what's feeding up to them. And if you can't do it, they certainly can't do it. And so I think that the step is, can I myself, the leader of this organization, find out this information because I have access to everything. I have no barriers. Nobody's going to stop me. If I can't find it, then that's going to give you a good idea of where you stand on this.
I love that. I love that. There's probably some good analogy to autonomy and having to do the webinar without your person that's interviewing you be able to have internet access the whole time.
Totally. So we found that we had the chat, we had a backup system, we had everything going on. Well, thank you so much, Laura. Always a pleasure. And you all can't see, but we also have Amethyst Green, who works with us at coLeague, who doesn't come onto the screen, but she's in full support of our work here today and always. So thank you, Amethyst. And I don't know if you all can see Olive the dog in the background of Laura's video, but that is a very important member of our team as well. So thanks, everyone. Join us in 2 weeks where we'll talk about that top of the pyramid, which is incentive. And the whole point of all of this is helping employees think about the future without being stressed about what's going on right now. So we're going to think about that, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.